Jay, Global X, which you control, has many of the thematic ETFs that Anna and I have just been talking about. I wonder if you can sort of give your thoughts on whether or not these will continue. I mean, you have some of the big ones. You have an infrastructure ETF, PAVE, I've talked about. You've got a cannabis, several climate change ETFs, and hot tech ETFs like a lithium battery ETF. Give us your thoughts on thematics for 2021. And do you have something that's going to come out of nowhere? Here's your chance to be a prophet. That's going to be a hot topic in 2021 we haven't thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with Anna. This is, we're living in a very disruptive time. We're seeing disruption in technology as advancements in technology are happening at a very rapid pace. We're seeing changes in people and demographics, how consumers decide to spend their money and aging populations around the world. And we're seeing a changing relationship with the physical environment, how we think about infrastructure and how we think about climate change. So disruption is happening in many different areas of the economy, and thematic investing and specifically thematic ETFs are really trying to harness that disruption. I think one of the reasons why thematic ETFs are growing so much right now is, let's just look back at history. If you wanted to invest thematically 30 years ago, maybe you bought a single stock, you bought a Microsoft, you bought an IBM to capture innovation. That gives you, good exposure 30 years ago to innovation, but not a lot of diversification. 15 years ago, maybe you bought a sector ETF. You bought a technology sector ETF, which gives you good diversification, but it's not really targeted to a specific theme like cloud computing or robotics. Now with thematic investing and thematic ETFs, you can really get the best of both worlds. You can get that targeted exposure to these themes while getting diversification across dozens of companies that are providing that exposure to a theme like cloud computing or cannabis or infrastructure development. So we think the rise in thematic ETFs is going to continue, especially in the new year. I think clean tech and clean tech related technologies like lithium and battery tech are really going to take off, as we've just seen a global environment that's become very focused on reducing and mitigating the effects of climate change.
Yeah. Todd, let me bring you here. You're an old hand like I am at watching these ETF business and thematic ETFs. Is there any roadblocks here to the concept? I believe that it fits very well with the concept of ETFs, particularly with the changes in the ETF structure last year, some of the legal situation last year with ETFs to make it easier for them to be created. Your thoughts on thematic? Is there any problems with it? Is there any roadblocks to it? And give us, is there something that's going to be happening this year that we haven't thought of that's going to be a big ETF theme? I'll give you an idea. Like, who would have thought work from home would have been an ETF theme in January of 2020? Yet it turned out to be that way. Obviously, that was a pretty hard game to guess. But if you had to guess, what would you say would be a big thematic ETF theme in 2021?
So I think the big challenge for investors is making sure they understand what they have. As Anna said, going under the hood. So PBW, which is an Invesco product, which is very popular, has about 40% of its assets in industrials and 6% in utilities. A competing ETF, which is from iShares, their Global Clean Energy, ICLN, which tripled in size, has the majority, more than half the assets that are in utility companies, and much less in industrials and technology. So these ETFs are not going to all perform the same. Even if you get the theme right, you got to make sure you understand what's inside the portfolio. The one thing I will say is the ETF industry does a great job of spotting that theme and then having multiple products that have come into the marketplace. We now have 3 work-from-home related ETFs that are directly tied to it, and then sub-themes like cloud computing from Global X and cybersecurity products from First Trust and others. So I don't know what that theme is going to be that comes from under the radar, but I'm confident the ETF industry is going to gravitate towards it relatively quickly.
Yeah. And how about you, Anna? Here's your chance to be a soothsayer for the year. Todd's right. The ETF structure is uniquely suited to be able to pick up quickly on these themes and turn them into investable ideas. Is there something out there that we're missing? I mean, it's pretty obvious clean energy is going to be a hot topic. It's pretty obvious diversity is going to be a hot topic. But if we're here 1 year from now and looking back, is there something you think we're missing that's going to prove to be popular?
Well, Bob, I would look at renewable energy as one of the topics that are going to lead the conversation in 2021, because when you have the combination of new policy changes and the technology advancement, think about solar panels today that cost 80% less than they used to. This is where the growth of an industry is going to come from. One more thing that I will be looking at is active non-transparent ETFs and ESG filters applied to active non-transparent ETFs, because if you have an opportunity to bring alpha with an ESG filter into the ETF wrapper, you may have some pleasant surprises this year.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that, but I want to go back to Jay for just a quick second. I've been reporting on the inflows in these thematic ETFs, but particularly the clean energy and tech-oriented, for several years now. But in the last few months, they've gone parabolic. I guess my question, particularly on things like clean energy, is, and the stuff you manage is up 50% since the election. What legislation does anybody think is going to happen this year that it's going to justify moving these stocks up 50%? I guess I'm getting a little skeptical just on sheer valuation issues, or am I being silly for asking this kind of question?
No, I mean, it's a great question, and we have to look at it as it's not just regulation. I look at it as there's three different factors that move thematic ETFs forward in general. You have the business environment, how much is being invested in by businesses. You have consumers and how much they're spending on a specific technology or theme. And then you have the regulatory environment and government spending. So if you look at those three different segments, clean tech is really doing pretty well in all three. You do have Biden with a Democrat Senate behind him, which, he's been very focused on a $2 trillion infrastructure plan, which is inclusive of clean tech as well. On the consumer side of things, you see more and more people installing solar panels, buying electric vehicles. Electric vehicle sales were up 70% in China this year alone. And if you look at the business environment, you're seeing that, a lot of what's happening with ESG is not just about investing. It's about changing how companies operate. And one of the things that that's doing is companies are becoming, they're thinking about themselves as members of society. How do they impact the environment? How do they impact their customers? How do they impact their employees? So when you have this rise of interest in something like climate change or various social issues, you see companies really putting dollars behind that as well. So I think it's not just a regulatory change. I think it's the confluence of multiple different stakeholders that are pushing clean tech forward right now.
Todd, is that enough? I mean, it's a good point Jay is making, changing how companies operate. It's sort of the zeitgeist, sort of shifting the Rubik's Cube in everybody's head towards clean energy and diversity and ESG themes. But still, there's a point where the prices get stupid. And I know you're not a stock strategist or an analyst. You're an ESG analyst. But isn't there a point at which somebody's going to push back? I love to see inflows into these things, and they've been titanic. But is it reasonable to start asking questions here about the constant inflows?
So certainly, yes. I think the inflows, the fact that the stocks inside have climbed so much in many of these various themes is certainly something to be watchful of. So we at CFRA rate ETFs in part based on the holdings and what we think of the valuation of the holdings. And there are thematic ETFs, like, for example, SKYY, a cloud computing ETF, where we think the stocks inside are overvalued. And we think there's better opportunities that are out there. So investors really want to understand what they're getting, not just the theme, but the underlying stocks inside to make sure it makes sense going forward, not just in the past.
Yeah. And I just want to close with you and ask about the whole ESG theme. There's been a lot of discussion that there's going to be some pushback to some of these themes. So, for example, the SEC, there's already people floating around the SEC who are saying, we want to do a survey of companies asking them, what is your policy on climate change? Not that you're violating a policy, just what policies do you have? And the mere act of asking this question is a sort of nudge, a way to push them into thinking more about doing that. Already I'm seeing articles and people emailing me saying, aha, you see, this is very subtle coercion, maybe a strong word, but towards pushing people towards adopting policies on climate change. The same with diversity. NASDAQ recently said that they're going to be looking much more at boardroom diversity, particularly more women on the board, as a factor in listings at the NASDAQ. All of us seem to think that this is a good idea, but there are people who immediately pushed back and said, wait a minute, is this necessarily the role for the SEC? Is this appropriate given their role in the market structure? So I guess this is a broad question, a policy question for you. All of us feel that these questions need to be answered. The question is, what forum is the right one to address them in?
That's a very interesting question, Bob. And I would break down the answer into two pieces. So on the one hand, you have disclosure, because the SEC is really focused on disclosure, truth in advertisement. It's not enough to say that you are ESG, especially when E, S, and G mean so many different things for so many different sponsors. So one thing is about disclosure. Truth in advertisement, we want to make sure that companies that portray themselves to be ESG compliant somehow show what it means for them and disclose that. The other piece of the answer is pressure and pushing a certain type of behavior. So data shows that certain behavior associated with ESG is actually helping companies deliver better performance. So on my end, there's nothing bad with that. Pushing for a better diversity, whether it is gender diversity or any other type of diversity, is healthy. I don't think that the SEC is trying to change behavior, but it's certainly putting pressure on companies to come clean and disclose their policies. Now, that in turn may result in changes in behavior, which I think overall are healthy for the industry. And right now, we have seen that by focusing on ESG, you don't have to choose between performance and socially responsible investing, because ESG strategies have delivered very good results over the last few years.